COVID-19 pandemic on taxation. And to meet this challenging debate, we have today with us Professor Alberto Comelli, who is a tax law professor at Parma University, and also is a prominent tax lawyer with his law practice in Rome. We also have today with us Professor Pasquale Pistone, who is a academic chairman of IBFD, and also teaches in two different universities, the University of Viena of Economic and Business, and also as an associate professor in tax law at the University of Salerno in Italy. And finally, we have also, we're extremely delighted in receiving our good friend from IET and also from PUCRS, Professor Eduardo Schoueri, who has a full professorship in tax law at University of São Paulo, also is a partner in his law firm, La Casa Martins Pereira Neto Gurovich and Schoueri Advogados, and also is vice president of IBDT, who is a partner of IET, which are two of the big tax institutes here in Brazil. And we are also very glad to be debating with Professor Schoueri. And as you can all see, we have a really great event in front of us. So I won't take any more time and leave that to our guests. And Professor Pedro Adamy, who is the president of IET, is also joining us, and he will give a short introduction to the topic of our debate. So I won't take any more time of our audience and put the word to Professor Pedro Adamy.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank, of course, Professor Comelli, Professor Pistone, and Professor Schoueri. It's a real honor to have such a team debating such hot topics as the pandemics and taxation of pandemic in times of a pandemic. Since it's a global pandemic, all countries need to worry about the tax effects or of the economic effects of taxation, the economic crisis that is upon us, and of course, what can states do to fight this crisis, and also in the global scenario, what can international taxation do to try to relieve some of the effects of this crisis. So I won't take any time. I'll thank all three professors for being with us. I'm sure it will be a delightful and very profound debate. Thank you very much. So Professor Pistone, if you want to start, we'll very gladly hear you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm happy to be with you, even if remotely. Would have been a great pleasure to be in Brazil with Pedro, with Artur, and with Luis. And of course, with Alberto, we have even coincided once in Brazil. But unfortunately, that's not possible. And unfortunately, we have to get used to operating remotely much more frequently than we would otherwise do. We are in times of global pandemics. We are discussing global issues, and we are searching for global solutions. This is actually the reason why we thought about having me kicking off with the international taxation issues, and then continuing with the issues, how they have been addressed in Italy, and that will be what Alberto will do. And of course, in both cases, we will enjoy having our Brazilian friends, Pedro, Artur, and Luis, interacting with us as discussants. They will definitely be triggered by some of our points. And we also hope that there will be some questions from you. And Pedro will tell you more how to ask those questions. But in principle, I think you have a function on YouTube, and you can actually do that. You should know actually already how to do that. I'm quite sure that this is not the first e-platform meeting for any of you. During this past few days, we have been doing webinars more frequently than we would otherwise. So we're talking about global issues and global solutions. When it comes to international taxation, we have to understand that there are global players and that countries are interested in getting hold of their profits. Maybe they're not very interested in taking losses into account. And at the same time, I should say that much more than any other time in the past, we have big issues with reactivating the economy. I want to use this expression because, in fact, the economy, is really in a challenging moment. So I don't know how familiar we are with tax incentives, but this is a time for tax incentives. And therefore, tax incentives create repercussions also at the international level, because on the one hand, if there is a tax incentive, one community bears the burden, and then you really want to make sure that that is not regarded just to be as, any form of low taxation, as if somebody were in a tax haven. So that's a different situation, because we really want to do something for the economy. Now, I have thought about focusing on 3 issues. These are going to be technical issues, but the idea is also that you have the opportunity of this seminar also to have a look at the type of issues that are being discussed at the international level at times of global pandemics, and what is being done or what may be done. And of course, I'll try and be a bit provocative, otherwise my Brazilian friends will fall asleep and they wouldn't be able to ask any questions. And Alberto will not fall asleep just because of courtesy or being both he and I Italian. So we have 3 points. The first point on the agenda is tax treaty issues. The second point is the so-called BEPS 2.0. And BEPS 2.0 is normally used to indicate the base erosion and profit shifting project from the OECD, which is a project to try and stop aggressive tax planning and international tax avoidance. And 2.0 stands for issues connected with the digitalized economy and preventing the race to the bottom. This is what Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are. I am willing to address them from the perspective of the so-called COVID-19 era, where many things have changed. And as you will hear me saying, there are losses and super profits. And super profits, actually, you even find them on the 3rd point of the outline. I will briefly refer to transfer pricing issues and to what happens with those super profits. And of course, that I thought about doing that since I have the pleasure of speaking in front of one of the world most renowned experts on transfer pricing. And I'm sure you know whom I'm talking about. Let's start with the first issue. Well, the OECD has been releasing a document some time ago, over a month ago, just to address, what technical issues arise in connection with tax treaties at the time of the COVID-19. Now, tax treaties are agreements between countries through which countries determine how to exercise their taxing powers with a view to preventing double taxation or giving relief for double taxation. Now, the strong point made by the OECD, we are at the time of force majeure, and therefore force majeure is an exceptional situation, and force majeure doesn't change the tax nexus. So the fact that the country has the right to exercise its taxing jurisdiction on a personal or objective basis and doesn't change allocation, how much a country gets to tax and how much a country is obliged to give relief. This is the position of the OECD, and this is a technical position that has been explained in a specific document. But the issue is also for the future. Will the judiciary go along with it? Will the judiciary accept that there is no change in tax nexus and allocation as a kind of dogma, a dogmatic statement? Please bear in mind that this is not something that lasts for 1 or 2 days, 1 or 2 months, but it's going to last a little bit longer. And as long as it gets closer and closer to a year, then the difficulties for international taxation will be growing. And we do not know precisely whether in the entire world there will be the same approach. So let me briefly outline what the OECD has indicated. And I will say what the OECD has indicated, and maybe you already see that in a couple of places, I also indicate what the OECD has not addressed. Now, there are 4 areas in which the OECD has intervened with this report. One is business profits, and in particular, the concept of permanent establishment, the fixed place of business through which an enterprise carries on an activity in a country other than that of residence. Then place of effective management, and this is a concept that relates to the situations of possible discussion with the residence, the place of residence of a company or dual residence. The third area is cross-border workers. So we're talking about income from employment. And the fourth point is the residence of individuals. And I have been using also a little bit of an informal language in English by talking about stranded persons, but this is actually the language used by the OECD. A stranded person is not the person on the beach. It's the person who is sort of, happens to be in a place locked out of her country or his country, or just, in a place where, where he or she was caught by this crisis. So don't think that I'm into a real mood of talking about beaches. Now, the permanent establishment concept, well, the permanent establishment is a part of the business which is located in a different place and different country from that of residence of the company or of the entrepreneur in general. And the point made by the OECD is that if, we have some people in a different country from that where they normally work, that doesn't create a fixed place of business. However, we have to take into account, and I'm trying not to dig too deep, otherwise it will be too technical. However, we are also aware that at this moment, we have the so-called contingency stuff, because we need to adjust business as fast as possible because there are business opportunities and because there are huge issues. So from that perspective, if you recruit somebody in a different country, I mean, you can't just ignore it. Of course, you recruit that person for force majeure issues, but still, I think that, one thing is considering the home office of one of your employees who's not allowed to go to the company. And another thing is somebody you have recruited being aware that that person would work from the home office. And, also taking into account that my impression is that we are digitalizing even more than we had done so far. So I think that's an important point. And the same issue affects the agency permanent establishment. So the permanent establishment, which is characterized because of somebody acting in the name of the enterprise, and the construction PE. The construction PE, it's pretty much related to installation. So when you have roadworks or you're building a bridge, then we know that for a certain period of time, there have been interruptions because it was simply prohibited to work. And so that the OECD has basically indicated that temporary interruption should not be taken into account for this purpose. But still, as you can see, we have technical issues, but those technical issues have to be contextualized. So I still have some hesitation as to what may happen at the level of the judiciary. As for the place of effective management, well, again, the criterion is the same. Temporary situations due to force majeure do not count for changing the place from which the company is effectively, normally, usually, and ordinarily effectively managed. Still, the issue is if we are changing the business model and going more into a remotely managed company, well, I think that we cannot just say that it's all due to force majeure. So if the remote business model picks up in the way that the enterprise is managed, that will have repercussions. And as for cross-border workers, the issue is there a little bit more complicated because in a way we have specific rules within Article 15 of the Model Tax Convention, which is normally used also in a large number of bilateral treaties. And in a specific provision of within Article 15, there is a reference to the physical presence in a country. And that specific provision is Article 15.2a. So the issue is what happens in 15.2a if a person is not present in a country for 183 days, as Article 15.2a requires. Will that criterion be met? If that criterion is the decisive one for allowing the state of activity to exercise its taxing rights, well, I am not sure that the nexus should remain, because if there has been a weaker link with that country due to the remote activity of this employee, I am not so sure that that country should get taxing rights. And I'm not saying because I want to challenge what the OECD has said, but because I know that the judiciary will take into account significantly the contextual situation. And these are some of the matters that have to be addressed. And I'm not sure whether my discussants will have some issues on this. I'm trying to be a bit provocative. Otherwise, as I said, they will get bored. And the fourth area is residence of individuals. So residence of individuals, we know that the physical presence matters for determining under domestic law of either contracting state where a person should be resident for tax purposes. However, the fact that somebody is in a different country from that where he would otherwise be resident for a year, that's a kind of complex issue. So suppose that I have decided to move to another country because I am taking up a job and I have started working. And this job, when I signed it, the contract required my physical presence. But in fact, I have never been present in that country. And I have remained in my previous home country. Or I have remained in a completely different country, stranded. In those circumstances, the physical presence, even if I intended to be physically present and my employer intended to have my physical presence there, I am actually not good. I'm not there. So we can't ignore that. Plus, there are big issues. In Brazil, you don't care that much, but in Europe, we do. There are people who have a job in one country and yet in another country and live in a third country with their family and haven't been traveling at all about the past 2-3 months, the so-called highly mobile persons. So those persons have never been on the ground of the other country, and we cannot ignore the actual facts. They can be due to force majeure, but still, we cannot ignore them. So that's pretty much to give you a complete overview of what I think are the tax treaty issues. Let me move on to the second out of 3 points of my presentation, and that is pretty much related to the BEPS project. And the second part, which is connected with the issues raised by the digitalized economy, and that's pillar 1, and the attempt by the OECD to prevent the so-called race to the bottom. So in other words, taking measures that avoid that people relocate or companies relocate to other countries just to get tax benefits. Now, this has been put on hold, and that was a wise decision. I mean, I think you've been given access also to a YouTube video which was released today, and I say much about this specific point. We need to take a decision in times of crisis, but this decision has to be, we need to think it over and decide how we intervene, because the situation is extremely complex. We have problems of neutrality, and those problems of neutrality are between remotely operated business and the traditional business models. We have problems of internation equity. So from this perspective, we have to make sure that there is not one country that gains a lot of power and another country that loses it. So I think it's quite important that we understand that in these scenarios, neutrality matters a lot. And neutrality matters a lot also for this COVID-19 scenario, even more, I would say, also because we have companies that are making super profits and companies that are reporting super losses. And as I said, countries are pursuing regulatory goals to a much greater extent than they used to be used to do in the past. I have heard about super taxation of super profits. I think profits should be taxed as profits. And if there are some additional measures that we have to take, well, maybe that could be done through other measures. And that could be strengthening the power, the taxing rights of the market country, maybe with digital services tax, taxes levied on turnover on top of taxes levied on profits. And that can perhaps help some market countries to overcome this crisis. I know there will be double taxation. These are issues that we will have to address. And the point concerning Pillar 2, and this preventing the race to the bottom, I think that we should differentiate. We should differentiate between measures countering tax havens and measures that relate to a genuine exercise of taxes for regulatory goals. So if we have a serious economic disturbance, and if we have serious economic problems, then we need to make sure that countries can give tax incentives, and that anyone interested in investing can actually be successful also in bringing the benefits back home. And problems are even bigger in the presence of tax-sparing clauses, which are abundant in Brazil's tax treaties. And why is that the case? Because with tax-sparing clauses, you have a credit or relief for double taxation, which equals what taxes should have applied in a country. And if we do that and then we compensate the tax incentives when a tax incentive is given, then I think that there would be also actual conflicts with the agreement between two countries that we have included in a tax-sparing clause. So in a way, what I'm suggesting is that there should be a dialogue on the establishment of global regulatory standards for taxation. So in other words, what is desirable for reactivating the global economy? What type of measures should be treated in a way that avoids any possible compensation through measures of Pillar 2. And Pillar 2, the proposal is called GLOBE, and we have difficulties from a technical perspective concerning the establishment of a single rate, the minimum rate. When a country goes below that minimum rate, then this compensation would take place. And I think we should, as I said, take into account that in COVID-19 crisis, there should be carve-outs, or there could be carve-outs in that respect, even if that would otherwise not be the case. I am a bit more skeptical about the blending, because blending is a technical word which is being used at the global level for groups of companies. So when a group of companies gets higher taxes in one country and lower taxes in the other country, then one could say that the group is anyway not taxed at low rates because there is this compensation. But we have been writing at IBFD an article on this issue suggesting that there should be no blending at group level. Otherwise, there would be an advantage for multinational enterprises as compared to standalone companies. Finally, briefly, to the third point. As I said, there are companies with super profits, the digitalized companies, or, and companies with super losses, the ones that operate in fields that cannot quickly readjust to this context. Well, this is clearly killing all the area of transfer pricing, because if we search for valid comparables, it's just difficult. And it's difficult to determine what would be the arm's length conditions. And I think that at this moment, it's difficult to determine whether companies are also, taking advantage of this situation in order to trade some of their losses or some of their profits. So this is an idea in which I think we should not apply different rules for companies with super profits, but we should to some extent find some common ground in respect of a possible standard. So let's go to the conclusions. Well, number one, I think that at this time, there are many more losses than we used to have until recently in the world. So as I indicated, there is a world to discover beyond corporation tax. So states need revenue, and they have to decide how to collect the revenue and how to give incentives. So maybe it's a starting point of a new world that should include not just taxes on corporate profits, but also other types of taxes, including the ones on turnover, like digital services tax. But as I said, for me, it's really important to have some good levels of coordination. Plus, I see that there is a globally desirable regulatory standard for taxation, for reactivating the economy, and that should be the object of international tax coordination. So if I were to suggest the OECD to do something or to get involved in something, I would say this is one of the areas that can be further explored. And that also applies to this Pillar 2 or GLOBE proposal that should give proper consideration to tax incentives, just to separate them to forms of low taxation that you otherwise have in tax havens. And that's pretty much all from me. And I would like to hand the microphone and screen back to the colleagues in Porto Alegre.
Thank you so much, Professor Pistone. So Pedro, I think I'm going to allow Professor Comelli to present his PowerPoint presentation, or do you have any questions that we should present now?
Yes, we can leave all the questions for the end of the debate, or
I prefer. Yeah, I prefer, definitely. So Professor Comelli, the word is with you now.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank you all the organizers of this interesting webinar. The chosen topic is very important in this period. Very well. At the beginning of the health emergency, the Italian government adopted a decree law model from a tax viewpoint on the decree laws enacted in the past to face natural disasters, such as earthquakes. In other words, natural disasters have been the starting point for the lawmaker. In this regard, the government has suspended and postponed for a few months the payments of withholding tax on employees' income, social security, and welfare contributions, as well as VAT for companies, artists, and professionals with a tax domicile, registered office, or operating headquarters in Italy, who recorded revenues or fees below 2 million euros in the 2019 tax year. Okay. The suspension concerns payments due in the period from March 8 to 31st, 2020, which must be made by May 31st without charging penalties and interest, or by a rescheduling plan with a maximum of 5 equal monthly installments. And there is no doubt that a pandemic is very different from a natural disaster. But the government has considered natural disasters as its point of reference. I say it's the starting point for tax purposes. More generally, on the legal side, Italy has reacted to the pandemic with an impressive production of provisions with specific reference to decree laws and Prime Minister's decrees, not to mention the rules and regulations adopted by the individual regions. On the whole, this has resulted in a very fragmented regulatory instrument, lacking systematic coherence. On the tax side, it is a response characterized by a conservative approach, in an essentially defensive logic, in which the Italian government reacted by prioritizing at first the protection of citizens' health, and only secondly, the inevitable loss of revenue resulting from the lack of tax revenue, in parallel with the need to incur further debt. A largely pragmatic approach has been adopted by favoring a conservative logic and of the already existing regulatory system. And this is a very important point, in my opinion. Up to now, there has not been the courage to look beyond the pandemic, thus laying the foundations for a structural reform of the tax system, or of a significant part of it, probably for the state's reasonable fear of any revenue loss, which may occur in the phase of acute crisis. On the eve of the pandemic, two reforms were being discussed in Italy. It is the reform of the personal income tax in relation to the crisis of tax progressivity, and the tax jurisdiction reform with specific reference to the tax judge status. A few months later, there is no longer any discussion of either of the two reforms, although the need to take significant action for different reasons in both tax law areas is widely shared. The issue of the overall reform of the tax system has remained in the background, while the emergency we are all experiencing is a great opportunity to rethink some fundamental principles of tax law, starting with those which are most in crisis, thus questioning principles that have been so far taken for granted. For example, we could rethink the reasonable balancing within a balanced system between consumption, labor, and capital taxes. See Jeffrey Owen's very recent publication. All right. Okay. This is the time, the right time to define how the tax system should be once the COVID-19 emergency is over. In other words, the recovery of the economy requires an ambitious project and the implementation of structural measures, which can also be implemented outside the context of the health emergency and hence on a permanent basis. In other words, how will be our tax system after the COVID-19 era? How can we imagine it should be reformed in a structural way? The economic recovery shall not be based on the provision of almost generalized welfare measures, because the welfare measures do not facilitate growth. The indiscriminate mass provision of financial resources will certainly not be sufficient for recovery and is only a first step to overcome the crisis. The relaunch decree that was enacted yesterday evening, by the way, contains some important provisions with specific reference to companies. First of all, it does not provide for the abolition of the regional business tax, the so-called IRAP, as it would have been largely desirable, but for the generalized rebate of the balance due for the 2019 tax year and of the first advance payment for the current year, 2020. This provision applies if the revenue generated in the year 2019 does not exceed 250 million euros. At first reading, this is a deferral of payment and not a tax waiver on these sums, which are due by way of IRAP. An interesting provision is envisaged for the capital strengthening of medium-sized companies with a registered office in Italy, it is with an amount of revenues recorded in the tax year 2019 exceeding 5 million euros. Furthermore, the company must have recorded a reduction in revenues in March-April 2020 compared to the same period of the last year, 2019, of no less than 33%. However, this provision is very complex and difficult to implement, and also is subject to authorization by the European Commission. In addition, the implementation of the plastic tax and the sugar tax in Italy has been suspended and postponed until January 1st, 2021. I wish to underline a very interesting provision as a measure for financial support to companies. It applies in the event of the company's transfer for valuable consideration of monetary receivables due from defaulting debtors, the so-called non-performing receivables, or receivables that are difficult to collect by December 31st, 2020. These receivables can be turned into tax credits as some requirements and conditions materialize, which are very complex and will hence make the provision difficult to implement. Consequently, this provision will undoubtedly apply to a very limited number of companies. Considering it as a support measure, if not amended, it will be scarcely implemented in Italy. The aim it pursues, however, can be widely shared, and I hope its implementation will be further streamlined. Okay, let's go to the conclusions. The measures introduced by the relaunch decree, enacted yesterday, can only be considered stopgap solutions to an emergency situation aimed at tackling the health crisis. They are not designed to improving the tax system in the medium and or long term. And this is the Achilles heel of the whole structure for tax purposes. An overall strategic plan is totally lacking in Italy. All the more so if we consider that there are some tax havens in Europe and that Great Britain, after Brexit, will make great efforts on the competitiveness side to attract companies to its own country. Hence, we must highlight the short-sightedness of the lawmaker, I mean the Italian lawmaker, who has so far failed to seize the opportunity opened up by the crisis to look to the future by introducing a number of important structural reforms that can no longer be postponed. Okay. Okay, you see now the Gothic Duomo of Milan with its square totally empty. And finally, please let me remember all the doctors and the nursery staff who died fighting against the COVID-19 in Italy and all over the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for the very complete and very heartwarming presentation. I would also, as just a very preliminary note, I see that many of the approaches that Italy is using is very similar to the approaches that Brazil is using in this moment. So a great part of your presentation, we could just switch Italian approach for Brazilian approach because they would fit very well to our reality also. So thank you once again, and I will immediately transfer the words to Professor Schoueri for his comments on the two presentations.
Thank you, Artur and Pedro, for the invitation. So nice to comment on presentation made by my friends Pasquale and Alberto. One more on an international perspective, one more on a domestic perspective, and I'll try to bring this, let's say, some more inputs on it. The international perspective, which was brilliantly presented by Pasquale. Also, I would have some questions here to discuss. Pasquale presented the OECD's approach and, of course, some critics on it. There's one thing which Pasquale did not comment and which would be, and at least it's a reality in Brazil, although let's say for Brazil, we don't have this as a problem because, as Pasquale said, we do not have so many international workers. However, Pasquale, I can imagine that in Europe, you should also be facing the situation of employees who are getting some monies for staying home. That means, at least in Brazil, it happens that that government is paying a part of the salary for employees to stay at home. However, companies are also paying some amount, let's say as an addition to the amount which is being paid by the government. This brings domestic issues to know how you would treat this on a deductibility perspective, because it would be a donation or not. But this is not what I'm going to face here. It's only a concrete question. But from an international perspective, whether or not you can include this in Article 15 of the treaties. Because when you get Article 15, the text itself says payments in respect of employment, which you could, at least it's I would say, well, this is a payment in respect of employment. How, on the other hand, the commentary says from the exercise of employment. And this is not a payment from the exercise. So according to your understanding, would the word exercise, which is seen in the commentary, but not in the treaties itself, would it be relevant for deciding whether or not to apply Article 15? Or would you say that since it is in respect of employment, I mean, companies are paying to people because they are employees, because they continue to be employees despite not working in the moment. So this is enough to say this is in respect of the employment. You already guessed this is my position, but since it's not what is in the commentary, I'd like to hear your idea on this. Another issue which was very good to see was the questions of BEPS 1 and BEPS 2, the pillars 1 and pillars 2 of BEPS, pillars 1, pillars 2, because, well, presently we are here making a webinar using a tool which is called Zoom. And I know that it's spread through YouTube. So what we can see that people say that while in a crisis, some people cry, there are those who are selling handkerchiefs. So we can see that Zoom, please, I hope we are not going to be censored for this. Please, Zoom, continue with streaming despite what I'm saying. But it's a reality that Zoom and YouTube are making lots of money because due to this crisis. This brings us to the importance of Pillar 1, because in Pillar 1 you have this idea of this extraordinary profits, not the regular one, and in which market has something to say. However, I would ask whether it is impossible, whether it is possible, really possible, to implement Pillar 1, considering that we presently have 3,000 treaties, more than 3,000 treaties, providing for the arm's length principle. And for me, it is very difficult to read in Article 9 of the treaties something to do with Pillar 1. I mean, Pillar 1 is looking for some way of fair share on profits which are extraordinary. And I love Pillar 1. I'm for Pillar 1 since of course, as a Brazilian, coming from a market like Brazil, I enjoy the idea that market would be remunerated. However, I cannot see this in the treaties. Or could we say, do you believe that our generation, I must say that I am a bit older than Pasquale, but I would say from a generation perspective, it is not a difference. So I would ask you whether our generation will finally see an international, a multilateral, but in a sense, international tax convention, which would put arm's length aside and would implement Pillar 1. So my question is, considering the importance of these profits, of these digital profits, of these non-material profits, which we are now seeing in this present crisis in Zoom and YouTube, do you think that this would be for forcing countries to skip the bilateral approach they have adopted so far and to adopt a real multilateral convention? I'm calling it a real multilateral convention because so far the MLI, despite being called multilateral, it is a multiple bilateral convention, because countries decide always on a bilateral basis, inspired through the MLI. And when you look at the Pillar 1, it is another spirit. It seems to be a real multilateral, a real world consensus, a world convention, which would be something completely different. Do you believe that this is something that our generation will see, or this will only be seen by century 23, 24, I don't know, someday, and we are only discussing on dreams? The same now coming to Pillar 2, and I think it was very intelligent to mention that countries are now tending to adopt tax incentives. We in Brazil, as Artur has already said, we so far are not talking about tax incentives. We have only some postponements on some taxes. However, the pressure for some kind of tax relief will come in order for economy to recover. And whenever you talk about tax incentives, then you look at Pillar 2 with the idea of minimal taxation, and it seems to be in conflict. So do we need a Pillar 3? Do we need another approach in which we would respect countries' decisions on granting tax reliefs? I believe that this is an issue which you already presented. I wanted to say I completely agree that Pillar 2 maybe will have to be reviewed, because when you talk about minimal taxation, you usually think on tax havens, these bad guys. Now we are talking about serious economies which need to recover fast. And of course, the tax tool is one tool at their disposal. So the whole speech of Pillar 2, the whole speech of harmful tax competition and so on, and minimum taxation comes to another point now. Should we still talk about minimum taxation, about double non-taxation and so on, when countries decide not to tax as an incentive for their economies? I really think that this should be reviewed, and I'm glad that, sorry, I'm not glad, of course, I'm not glad for this pandemics, but I'm glad that this pandemics brings us the opportunity to rethink the measures of Pillar 2, which maybe the remedy may be stronger than the disease. So the Pillar 2 itself maybe should be reviewed, and I'm glad it has not been implemented. Well, continuing, and now maybe from an international, almost domestic, there's the problem of transfer pricing now legislation. As we know, we have the arm's length principle, and we have the methods, which are the OECD methods. Most of them are based on comparables. And the problem that we may face now with this COVID is that we are not going to find comparables. I mean, all of the methods are thought on profits split, cost plus profit, resale minus profit, and suddenly companies are having losses, huge losses, and we do not have benchmark for this. So I really don't know how we are going to think at arm's length without comparables. And if this is true in general, this is more true for Brazil, because in Brazil, as we know, we have predetermined margins of profits, and companies are not going to have profits now. They are having losses. So I can see that not only Brazil, generally, tax systems are going to have problems with the transfer pricing methods because they are based on profitability. But in case of Brazil with predetermined margins, I think that the problem is even bigger. And to make our problem even bigger, even higher, and for you to come to our reality, I must inform our Italian friends that in the last 3 months, those of us who had any resources in reais, my case, got poorer in more than 45%. That means, should I have, by that time in January, should I have had my savings in euros or in dollars instead of, unfortunately, in reais, I would not suffer this. But we had so I'm talking about 45% exchange loss in 3 months. How can a transfer pricing legislation live with such a difference? We had in the past, we had the opposite. When real was valued, then we had a law which still exists, providing for the possibility of government bringing some measures for exports to consider the valuation of real. But presently we are having a devaluation, and we have no law, no measure, no provision for considering the 45% devaluation effect when you get comparables, especially if you use comparables of previous years, which is also possible. So the currency problem which we are facing is something from a transfer pricing perspective, which COVID has brought. Well, you already mentioned the PE issue, and of course the telework and what is happening in this. I mean, this idea of working in other places. Another point is, what can we do to recover? I mean, how is government going to finance the crisis? Of course, my hope would be that government would simply reduce its own expenses, would be more efficient. This is my hope. However, we are not seeing this. All we are seeing here that the measures which are being thought of are increasing taxation. And from this perspective, what we are facing here, I don't know whether it is true in Italy also, but here, instead of thinking on new taxes for a new economy, we are here discussing old taxes. For you to have an idea, here in Brazil, they began to discuss again a wealth tax. Not only wealth tax, but a super wealth tax, only on major wealths, which is something which has been abolished almost worldwide, and has been the solution. Or taxing dividends, as if this would be the solution, not considering that we already tax companies on a 34% basis. Brazil does not tax dividends, not as an incentive, but as a measure to avoid economic double taxation, since we already tax companies on a 34%. On the other hand, we do not see debates here on some, for instance, on digital tax, for instance, the DST is something which we are not seeing here as a debate, or something which you read in some papers abroad, which would be the robot tax. The idea that robots now could be considered as such as an economic unit which brings value, which could also be considered as the robot itself, as a unit which could be taxed for the value it brings. A robo taxation is something which you discuss in the literature, which I could consider at least a modern tax, a tax which is considering the present reality. I mean, we have less workers doing the work, we have more machines doing the work. So we must finance our welfare state, and we do not have workers getting salaries because now we have machines doing it. So is it time or not for us to, if we need more resources, to think on taxing where the ability to pay appears, where the wealth appears, which is this modern economy, which are the robots. So I would ask you both whether or not domestic measures should not go beyond merely postponing some payments, because postponing means someday you're going to pay. At least I cannot, at least in Brazil, they're talking postpones for the second term of this year. I cannot see a company in September, October being able to pay the tax of the month plus the tax of 3 months behind. So it's a very short time for a very short postponement, which is of course not a measure or a relief.
you cannot consider this a relief. So is it not time, is not COVID an opportunity for us to rethink tax systems? In Brazil, moreover, I must mention this as the last point, we were having in Brazil a very healthy discussion for at least finally introducing a comprehensive VAT in Brazil. And even this debate, which I consider healthy, has been put aside. That means we are facing a new challenges with an old tax system and adopting and looking for very old remedies as the wealth tax. This would be my first impressions, my first comments on the both brilliant presentations I heard. Thank you for once again.
So thank you so much, Professor Schoueri. As we all know here in Brazil, Professor Schoueri is our master of provocation. He is a really engaged critic, and I think he made some excellent points on both presentations. And I will once again transfer the word to Professor Pasquale to first answer, and then to Professor Comelli. So Professor Pasquale, please,
Yes.
you have the word.
Yeah, Luis, thanks very much. I see that you are in very good shape, so that makes me very happy. And no, but I meant mentally. I mean, physically, of course, you're always in good shape. But no, I really liked all your questions, and I think you know how happy you make me when you make provoking and interesting questions. I've tried to write down notes, and I hope I haven't missed anything. Let's start by the international workers being kept at home. Now, we need to understand, we're all lawyers after all, and we need to understand these payments a little bit better, because we first need to understand if they are related to the employment. So in other words, if the government is paying somebody just because this is an employee who stays at home, or is giving money to everybody who stays at home, regardless of whether you have a formal employment contract. So that's the first. Assuming that the government of country X is just paying that to people who are employees, that is something which brings it closer to income from employment. Now, I have been discussing, I've been writing on this, of course, not on COVID-19 related matters, but I have been writing on the meaning of Article 15 and income from employment, and the exercise of the employment, and the meaning of the commentary and the differences that can be related to that, also in connection with income from inaction, because in fact, that could very well be equated to income from inaction. It's just that it's paid by the state. So if you make a comparison between the so-called covenant not to compete and the income from inaction paid by the state, you would possibly come to the conclusion that we have a similar type of income, which is related to the employment. Actually, the employment is the non-employment, or the fact that you don't do anything. In this case, you're obliged by the state not to get out, but frankly speaking, you could still in many cases be teleworking. So I'm not entirely sure that you're not prevented from working. Be one way or the other, it's income from inaction, as long as it constitutes income, it's income from inaction. And as long as the reason for this payment is connected with the fact that somebody is not allowed to go to work, then I would say that that can very well come under Article 15. Of course, it is extremely difficult to make Article 15 working without a place of activity, because then you have to come out and say, where is a place of activity? And possibly the answer is the place of activity is where you physically are. And that can raise issues, because when we're talking about payments made by the state, we have the one of the official justifications for the state of the fund principle in Article 19 is that one state should not tax the other. We know that this is just an excuse, because we have also Article 19(1)(b), and that's the local workforce exception. And of course, in that case, we don't care about that. But still, I would say that that is not an issue that we can solve easily. I don't think it's a donation, unless it's characterized as a donation. You mentioned that, but frankly speaking, I don't think you were that persuaded that it would be a donation. I know I haven't been really concise, but your questions, are not that easy to answer. So, as I said, you're in good shape, and I'm delighted that you asked those questions. And of course, we can have different views.
Pasquale, just to mention, you answered beyond my question and better than my question. My question was in case, which I was thinking, if the employer pays as a complementation from what the government made. So this was the employer himself, him or herself paying to the employee. But your answer was much better than my question because you considered government paying. So I prefer your answer than my question.
Okay, but at least I hope I gave some kind of answer to your question, framing it in. So let's go to number 2. And number 2, I have question number 2. It's actually more than one question. It's split into 2 pillars. And I was joking in this video that I have released on YouTube today. This IBFD tax takes about the proliferation of pillars. I said we will soon end up in a Greek temple, and we will have far too many pillars. And I think we have to make sure that we don't increase the number of pillars to the level of the indirect taxes that you have in a country, to the east of Peru and the northeast of Argentina. But we have to keep them within reason. And I am not very much in favor of this proliferation of pillars. And I clearly agree with you on the fact that we have super profits at this moment for some companies. And of course, one can say, well, if there's a super profit, the excess profit should go to the market country. And this goes in the right direction because we help the market country to get more from this. However, it's really difficult to make this work concretely. As you have rightly indicated, it's impossible now to understand what would be the comparable. And you have also expressed some skepticism about Article 9 and Pillar 1, which is one more problem that arises in this context. Now, the final part of your second question, first sub-question, was connected to say, you said, will our generation see a real multilateral convention? Will we move away from arm's length? I mean, I am among the persons who are skeptical about moving away from arm's length, but at this very moment, it's extremely difficult to identify or to make arm's length work, because whatever is meant to be the arm's length or the conditions between independent parties now, it's just completely different. So it's simply impossible to make it work like that. My point is, I think that in times of crisis, we perceive even more the need for global coordination than we can otherwise think, because our economies are so interrelated. We are perceiving that clearly in Europe, but at the global level, we can't just ignore that, because otherwise there will be enormous problems. We either kill business, which is really the wrong thing to do, or we create, effects that create enormous distortions, and countries at this moment also need revenue. And I'm going to say something also about one of your points, or the recipes for collecting revenue in Brazil, in a couple of minutes, but I have to get there. I think that something will come out of this, and perhaps out of this crisis, we understand that there is more a need for global coordination rather than for coordinated bilateralism, which goes to the advantage of some countries only. But for sure, we'll have to do something, and here it's a second sub-question of your second question. For sure, we'll have to do something about tax incentives. And I don't think that we need a separate pillar, but we do need to set some standards for seeing which incentives are genuine and to what extent. And I absolutely agree that we have to respect the country's decision. So if we're talking about something which is done to reactivate the economy, I mean, think, Luis, that in the European Union, we have suspended state aids, and that's unprecedented. So we are allowed now to give, until the end of the year, we are allowed to give state aids within the European Union. So that is simply the first time ever we do this. So it's really an exceptional time. So I think that we could come to some kind of, typical features that should be preserved in terms of, regulatory goals of taxation. Regulatory goals of taxation has never been so important. And I think that it's going to become even more for the months to come. We haven't seen really many measures being taken. Now,
just to understand, so
yes.
Pasquale, the question is concrete. So you do believe that we are going to have more than coordination, that we are going to have some kind of multilateral convention which would revoke all Articles 9, which would supersede Article 9, and which would introduce Pillar 1 as something which all countries would agree, forget arm's length, forget transfer pricing as it should be, and just consider fair share and how to distribute revenue.
I believe that this is the right way forward. I'm not saying that we're definitely going to get it, because there is one problem. You know, I was again joking about, when in this tax takes of IBFD, I was saying that some people are calling measures unilateral just because the US doesn't agree on them. So the problem is that we need to have global consensus. But I think that there will be an enormous pressure at this moment. I am suggesting that Europe should go more for digital services tax at the European level, and that will create the conditions at this very moment to reach some kind of agreement on multilateral coordination. So I'm not saying that we will make it. I'm saying that this is the right way forward, Luis. This is the right way forward. So some kind of multilateral framework that could potentially, enhance the current situation. But I'm not sure whether that will take place, because at the end of the day, sometimes, you get the feeling that if you were speaking as a scholar and not endorsing the views of some people who want some kind of results, you're just left as a theoretical, person who makes theoretical statements, because some of the things are simply politically unenforceable. But as I said, right now, there will be, I really expect the EU to push for digital services tax. Of course, in the EU, we don't have the possibility of raising enormous revenues as you can do with dividends. In times of COVID crisis, I understand that if Brazil introduces taxation of dividends, it will collect an enormous amount of profits. I can imagine, the enormous profits made by Brazilian enterprises and the enormous dividends that will be distributed and the enormous revenue that will be collected. If you introduce taxes on dividends right now, I'm sure that you will, your revenue collected will remain pretty much the same. So it's, we have to find revenue somewhere. And because, of course, I was ironic, Luis, but because there are, the only dividends.
It's good. You should be care, because I know some Brazilians, they could quote only this part of yours and say taxation of dividends in Brazil. So.
I just said that. I was speaking in an ironic way, and I just said that because I knew that we are live on YouTube, and I know, Luis, that you are very familiar with my ironic statements. But of course, I think that there will be dividends just of the highly digital business. So that will clearly give some revenue, but that is what I think should be taxed, not with super taxes on super profits, but should be taxed also from the perspective of the digital services tax, which I think can at this moment really play an important role. But as I said in the interview that is available on YouTube on the IBFD tax takes, I think that should be coordinated with income taxation and corporate taxation, because otherwise it will create distortions. Luis, let me continue. I know that my answer has been quite long, but I know that you're really interested in hearing me, and unless Pedro and Artur block me, I would also like to answer your third point. Yes, you're stuck now with the predetermined margins of profits in Brazil. I've always been, thinking that some predetermined margins would be the right way forward. However, now you're really stuck with it. Let me tell you how I would do that if I were in Brazil. Well, in Italy, you know that we have, predetermined margins for taxing income from immovable property. We call it the cadastral system, and I know you're familiar with that type of concept in Brazil too. So when there are exceptional events, like basically a flood, an earthquake, or similar other situation, then the government steps in and says, hey, it was really not possible because of the flood to grow carrots on this piece of land. Therefore, the piece of land was unable to produce income. Therefore, even if we have some predetermined taxation, then we can't really enforce it. So I think that if I were to advise the Brazilian government for the sake of saving the Brazilian economy, I would intervene with some exceptional measures, interfering with the predetermined margins. There is simply no other way out. Now, you said wealth tax is being discussed in Brazil. Tax in dividends, I already made some irony. Well, wealth tax is being discussed in several countries, Luis. It's not just being discussed in Brazil. Wealth tax has some implications according to the country in which it applies. So every country is different from the other, and it's pretty much up to the policy of the government what they want to achieve. Of course, in countries that want to hit a particular part of the population, then they can go for that. You can say at the end of the day, in exceptional times, this can be justified. And I would also want to say that the European Court of Human Rights has even discussed and endorsed a retroactive introduction of a tax, increasing the burden. The case is called plaisir, like pleasure in French. And you can easily find it on the website from the European Court of Human Rights. It's not on wealth tax, but on the idea that in times of crisis, you can introduce, even retroactively, that was the amazing thing, there was an endorsement for some exceptional measures. Personally, Luis, I am not in favor of wealth tax because it generates a number of measures which try to avoid this tax. And I don't think that's the way forward. But the number of colleagues, as you know, Luis, have different views. And I don't want to make further statements on this. Otherwise, we will continue until the Brazilian evening. And being aware that it's now 12:17, at least in that part of Brazil where you are. And the robot tax, and that will be my final point. We are discussing the robot tax. There is a doctoral student of ours in Vienna who's working on that. But the issue of the robot tax, it sounds nice, Luis, but behind the robot tax, we need to understand what we want to achieve with this robot tax. Because I'm not just thinking that we are killing all the jobs, we are just changing the jobs. Because the robot is taking some physical jobs, and then there are some other jobs which can still be, not completely killed. So it's a matter. It's sexy. It's attractive as a label, but we really need to understand what do we mean behind. What do we mean by that? Thank you for your patience.
So, Pasquale, thank you for your insights. They are very clearing of the points of view that Professor Schoueri has already made. And I will now like to hear Professor Alberto with his comments. And after that, Professor Pedro and I will have just very short general questions to present to all three of our guests. So Professor Comelli, please.
Yes, only a few things to underline from my point of view, following the provocations that I heard from Luis, that I have really appreciated as usual. How can the state, the Italian state, face the reduction of revenue? To lower the expenditures is not the right way, because in Italy we have tried many times to lower the expenditures, the public expenditure, and it was not a good solution. I mean, the result was almost zero. The postponement of tax payments is all right. It is a good idea for a short period of time. It's not the solution, of course, because the taxpayers will pay more in the future. We expect that the taxpayers will pay more. Then we will see if it is a dream or if it is a reality. We will see. The discussion in Italy at the moment is not concentrated on how the state, the Italian state, will raise the revenues to finance all the expenditures due to the crisis. At the moment, we are not discussing about it. I am sure that we will discuss it only after the summer, when the next session in the parliament will take in consideration how the budget of the state will be in the next year. I mean, with a big loss, of course, due to the COVID era. What I do believe is that we have not many solutions. I'm sure that taxes will be raised in Italy. I'm not happy about it. I'm sure that we will be called to support the Italian budget as taxpayers. First of all, we will discuss, this is my opinion, Pasquale probably will follow my speech, my personal idea about it. First of all, we will discuss about a property tax. In autumn, in October, November, not now, probably it could be a solution, but finding the right way to propose this tax as a general property tax. Taxing, I mean, immovable property, maybe bank tax accounts, and so on. The second idea that unfortunately we will take in consideration after the summer could be a forced loan by Italian residents. A forced loan by Italian residents. I do not envisage other solutions. It is not the time to increase the VAT rates because it's not a solution because of the consumption reduction. The digital tax, you have discussed it, Luis and Pasquale, is not for, in few months could not provide a good amount of revenue for the public finances. And it is not a solution in a short term. It could be the right solution in a medium-long term, not now. Therefore, dear friends, I am sure that after the summer, let's take time and let's take the sun, the summer. Well, not in Brazil, probably. It's winter in Brazil, when in Italy we go to the beaches, but it's all right. After taking the sun, it will be a hard autumn for we in Europe and in Italy more than ever. Unpopular tax measure in autumn will be under discussion. The cash flow of the families will be lower, and at the moment we have no officially we have no signs from the government on how the situation will be managed after the summer. So this is what I wanted to say. I mean, the answer could be what is there under the dress, remembering an old movie directed perfectly by Carlo Banzina in 1985, and the right title in English was "Nothing Under the Dress." This is the answer of what I think about the approach of the Italian government about the crisis to increase the tax revenue. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you so much, Alberto, for your comments also. And as I mentioned before, there are very clear symmetry between what Italian is doing and Brazil is doing. And also, as I mentioned, I'd just like to make a very short question to see your views on the Brazilian approach. And also Pedro will have, after my question, also a short question to present to our guests. And my question has to do with the role that the judicial system is having in facing extraordinary demands by companies concerning tax reliefs, because this is a really hot topic now in Brazil in this time of pandemic, because similarly to what we saw in Italy, the Brazilian measures, the legal measures that Brazil is adopting, and to use a very the idea that Professor Pasquale mentioned that he likes very much, I would say that we are now in Brazil having 3 pillars for the measures that the Brazilian government is using. One, as Professor Schoueri has already mentioned, is more taxation. So we have many prospects on possible new taxes to face the pandemic. Another is increasing expenditures, in which the government is spending billions and billions of reais, which is definitely going to increase our public debt. And the third pillar would be preserving tax revenue at any costs, even if that is in the cost of the failure of many companies in Brazil. So concerning these 3 pillars that are, I would say, the baseline for the Brazilian policy for facing the COVID pandemic, many companies are in desperate need from some sort of extraordinary tax reliefs, and they are going to the judicial system to ask for these claims. And we have now some 5,000 new lawsuits just for tax reliefs. And that is only in our federal level. The number is 5,000 new tax lawsuits for that, with that objective. And we have been seeing that normally the judges and the courts here in Brazil are washing their hands. They are simply denying all these claims, saying that they involve tax policies and no other measures can be adopted through these tax lawsuits. So we are facing really difficult issues with some companies that are in desperate needs, and they will definitely go bankrupt in a couple of months. So this is the Brazilian scenario in which the judicial system is not willing to participate in solving the issue, at least for now. So being that the case in Brazil, I would like to see what are the perspectives, not only in Europe, but also in Italy. So Pedro, would you like to present already your question, and then our guests can answer them all at the same time?
Yes, thank you, Artur. I have 2 questions. One is very close to what Artur just asked and concerns the role of courts. We just saw a decision, the German Constitutional Court, that blocked an European measure to try to help with the crisis. Do you think other national courts will block any other measures taken by any European state? And the second question concerns a manifest, let's call it this way, that Pasquale also signed alongside another a dozen other professors about solidarity in the European Union, calling for a tax, a real European tax. I see that Schoueri does not agree with this. You know, there's a lot of professors that we respect in that manifest, but we really have questions about an European tax. So my question would be, Pasquale, is really that feasible? Can we have an European tax? Alberto, is that even good? Should we have an European tax? Is that the right measure to fight the crisis? Thank you very much once again.
So I think we can follow the order. Pasquale, Alberto, and then Schoueri. Is that okay?
Okay.
Fine by me. Thanks very much. Very, very nice questions also from you. Yeah, give me a couple of minutes. Artur, the point is the role of the judiciary the judiciary should play the role of the judiciary, and of course the judiciary should also include the constitutional court, and the supreme part of the judiciary in the different countries should make sure that the legislative choices at this very moment don't reach situations which are against the constitution. And I believe in the fact that it is for the legislative to take immediate action. And not taking action can also mean that some of the existing taxes in the special scenario can turn out to be against the constitution. I am not Brazilian, and I understand that there is friction in this respect. It's an extremely delicate matter, and it's not that I want to wash my hands. One more person washing his hands, and of course it's very important to wash the hands at this moment, but still it's very delicate, and we have to respect also the fact that the direction is that there should be no starving and no killing of business, because if we kill business, we just kill, people will starve even more. So that is the time in which the government should really even if we need to increase expenditure at this moment, if we turn out with many people who lose their jobs, that will create effects that would be extremely difficult to recover. So at this moment, it is for the legislative to do this, but still the judiciary can send signals, and the signals can be sent in particular in connection with the constitution. And that is a way not to wash my hands, as I said, but still to just make the point that there should be a direction. And please just respect the fact that I don't feel suitable in making stronger statements because of the fact that I respect your country and its laws and its constitution. Now, let me go to the points raised by Pedro. And here, yes, we had on the 5th of May, the judgment by the German Constitutional Court, which came out nicely at the time of pandemics. It was perfect timing. And that was also very well perceived by the markets. I think it's important that we understand that there has been a tremendous problem between national constitutional courts and the Court of Justice for the past 60 years. And we have seen several episodes of that. Now, the amazing things, and that is also something we have in common with you guys in Brazil, is that we have the same constitutional values, which we call common constitutional tradition, but that sometimes courts interpret that differently. One thing that we have in common is the rule of law and the importance, and then the Rechtsstaatsprinzip, as you would call it. And I think one important point is also here. I'm talking to mainly a Brazilian audience. We have something called the primacy of European Union law, and the fact that it is for the Court of Justice to decide with exclusive jurisdiction what the European institutions may do or may not do. Now, I'm not saying that I justify what the Gauweiler judgment on the European Central Bank, but one way or the other, if I believe in the rule of law and in the principles, then it is for the Court of Justice to decide that. And I am not criticizing technically the analysis done by the court, by the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany on the 5th of May, but still I am saying that there are difficulties that the German state now has to face because of the fact that it is the highest court of that state. I think that the German Constitutional Court was perfectly aware that it lacked jurisdiction in that respect, but they wanted to make a statement on the principles, the fundamental principles in Germany, and I think that is something that has to be respected. Now, this brings me to the point, and I thank you, Pedro, also for mentioning about the European Tax Manifesto. We're heavily working because behind the manifesto also there is a research plan, and we're heavily working with the colleagues in that respect, and it's an extremely delicate matter. We think that at this moment there is accountability towards the nations, but there is no tax accountability against the European people. And we think that a country like Germany, since you mentioned that example, at this moment could solve a part of their problems by endorsing the shift toward of some taxes to the European level. I am not saying that we should have more taxes. So you give me the opportunity also on YouTube to say the European Tax Manifesto is not about having extra taxes. We are not crazy. We don't want to have more taxes. But we think that because it's impossible to get out of this crisis in a satisfactory way, also from a legal perspective, because European countries are obliged to solidarity, this, what has happened had the impact of almost a war. Because in terms, more people died in Lombardy than in World War II. More people died in Lombardy now. Lombardy is an Italian region. It's Milan's region, just for the ones who are not familiar with Italy, than in World War II. Then we are obliged to give solidarity. And the fact that we can give solidarity in a transparent way and in a way that makes everyone accountable toward the European Parliament is something which, in the view of some colleagues and myself, has some merits. And this is why we are working on it. I mean, clearly we're writing one or even two articles. We're not sure how many we'll get out of that, but we're working very heavily on that in those days, because we think that if Europe is obliged to solidarity, then this can be done in a way that also respects the legal values or the so-called common constitutional tradition that we have within Europe. But as I said, it's the same values that we have with you in Brazil. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Comelli.
Yes. Concerning your question about, the question raised by Arthur about the judicial system in Italy. In Italy, the judicial system is simply waiting. The judiciary cannot make proposals in tax law or in general in law. Our system is based on three powers that are different, and they are the legislative power, the judiciary power, and the executive power, the government. As all the legal systems in Europe, not considering the UK. Well, my opinion is that the judiciary will not take part on the discussion about how to raise revenues in this situation of emergency. And I don't know in Brazil how is the role of the judicial system, but in Italy it will not take part on the discussion. The judges only apply the provisions. They do not make proposals. Concerning the constitution, the German constitutional courts, I think that Pasquale said something that I agree 100%, and I will not make other comments about it. The EU solidarity. Well, the EU solidarity in this emergency situation is not enough at the moment. What I believe is that we will see in the near future whether the EU solidarity really exists or not. When the situation is bad, like in the COVID-19 era, I have seen EU member states give an answer that is not the right answer from a solidarity point of view. So I'm not very optimistic about this kind of solidarity in this moment, but I hope that my impression will not be confirmed in the future. The EU solidarity would require a common answer to this crisis, but I do believe that the situation of the crisis has been lived in a different way in all the member states, considering for instance, the Scandinavian states, where the number of dead is really lower than in Italy. I believe that the solidarity would require more effort from the member states, but we will see if Italy and other states with the higher number of deaths will be helped in their struggle against the decrease of tax revenue, and above all, if the loans that have been promised to Italy what will be the conditions for them. Okay, that's all.
Thank you so much, Alberto. So, Schoueri?
Well, first I'd like just to say I'm so glad that Pasquale has explained to us that they are not considering a new tax, because this would be terrible. But then comes the question, Pasquale, what is this new? I mean, is it not true that presently a part of the VAT already goes to the union? So what are you bringing new if you're getting old taxes and granting a share to Europe? Why would this be an European tax? What is the new in this? This would be my question first. And another, just clarification, of course. And another point was when Artur mentioned about the role of the judiciary. I believe, Artur, that really judiciary should play a more active role. I believe it is true for Italy, what is true for Brazil, that most of small and medium companies, I mean, now I'm talking about shops you have, they do not have sufficient cash for the whole month. That means they sell today to pay their bills of today. So if you have a taxable event today, but the tax is due within 1 month, it is not true that a normal businessman will say, okay, I made my sale, I already reserve a part for taxes, and I will only spend the other one. He or she will pay on a daily basis, considering that by the time the tax is due, new sales will be made, and he or she will be able to pay the taxes. This is the reality of most small and medium-sized companies. Suddenly,
right now, Luis, it's very sad that many shops are not reopening.
No, that's it. That's what I'm saying. Suddenly, you have a governmental measure. So it is, I mean, government is saying you are forced to close your shop. So you're not allowed to make any sale. On the other hand, do you remember the taxes which you should pay? Well, you must still pay these taxes. I believe that there is a difference between taxation and confiscation. And you talk about confiscation when the power, the state, is the same state which demands the tax, is the state which does not which prohibits you to pay the tax. I mean, it's an antinomy. How is it possible that government says you may not sell, you may not get cash, but you still must pay taxes? This is not tax anymore. This is confiscation. And I believe that the judiciary should see this scenario and should be more proactive to say that in a scenario in which governmental measures are strong enough as to prohibit you to get means for paying taxes, taxes should not be paid. You may not be demanded to pay taxes if you are prohibited to do so. So, Artur, I would answer that I believe that our judiciary has been very timid, very formalistic. I saw some decisions say, well, once you sold, you should already have the means for this. This is not real. This is not realistic for most of the small and medium-sized companies. They do not have this cash, and the judiciary has simply washed their hands. Yes, Pasquale, this may be good for COVID, but it's not good from the judiciary. I think we should have a more relevant role of the judiciary, declaring
that taxation is not confiscation.
Luis, confiscation is prohibited. It's against the property right according to the European Convention on Human Rights. And I agree with you, but the judiciary at the moment do not follow your approach. I mean, in Italy, they do not recognize the difference between taxation and confiscation. Therefore, I'm afraid that the judiciary will not follow your correct approach, that I do agree.
We have in our constitution, Alberto, literally saying that taxes cannot be used with the effects of confiscation. And the idea that taxes are the price of freedom, you pay to be free. Once you are no longer free to exercise your activity, you should not have to pay your taxes. So just something that's very hard to grasp, the idea that taxes are levied on any activity. Is they are a debt that the individual pays to be free to do whatever he wants under the law. So, well, thanks, Schoueri, for that.
So I think we are reaching. Actually, we have extended quite. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Pasquale owes me a small answer, just to explain.
Oh, sorry.
European tax would be different from the part of the VAT which already goes to
Sure. Sorry.
What is new?
So, Pasquale.
Yes. If you look at the collected revenue with the European tax and with the VAT that goes to the budget of the European Commission, and you look at the intervention by the European Commission, you see that it's pretty much like a drop in the ocean. So it's not that we don't have a European tax, but just that the size of revenue that goes directly from taxes to the European Union, it's an minimal part of what we need. This is why, with those friends, we are pleading for an effective exercise of taxing powers. And if you want to personally ask me what is the tax that I strongly believe in, I think you have understood that the digital services tax at this moment helps, not in the medium term, but if we are able to reactivate it, then it is a tax that can be levied also in respect of some companies that are making super profits. And that will just be, all I need is to have a coordination with income taxes, because there are some double taxation effects pretty much connected with the fact that I am skeptical that it falls under the scope of Article 2, and that is where I have difficulties. Article 2 of the OECD Model Convention, I meant, sorry.
Is there any other comments that one of our participants wants to make? No, so I must say we had initially planned a 1-hour conversation with our dear friends Alberto, Pasquale, and Schoueri, and Pedro also, of course. And we are almost reaching 2 hours, which I would say is a really good sign. We intended on doing this very short live event, but we almost had a full tax congress right in front of us. And this just shows us that we have some very important, complex, and urgent matters to deal with in this pandemic. So I'm really, I must say, I'm extremely happy to see the result of this event. And I must say that the video will be uploaded by Pedro, and it's going to be available on YouTube and other media if necessary. And also I'd like to see if Professor Alberto and Professor Pasquale will allow us to hand out the presentation that they delivered today. And once again, I must say thank you to all our guests, and also for Pedro for sharing this event with me. It was an extreme honor for us, and I think we today did an event that is going to be very commented by others in this near future. So thank you very much for all, and I leave the microphone open for all your last comments. if anyone wants to say anything.
No, just thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All of you.
So thank you once
Muito
again.
obrigado.
Muito obrigado. And I'd like to say to keep safe and keep all your family healthy, and we'll get through this pandemic together. Thank you once again.